You're listening to episode 144, Overcoming the Odds to Create a Better Future with Oleg Lougheed. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome, and thank you so much for tuning into this latest episode. I'm so grateful to have you here, and I have a great episode for you today. We're going to be joined by a new guest, Oleg Lougheed of Overcoming Odds. And before we get into it, I do just want to mention that this episode is sponsored by Navni. Navni is the top-ranked anonymous writing website in the world. Navni provides free wellness resources and low-cost online therapy services to help people cope with various levels of emotional distress. Write anonymously, feel better at novni.com. So Oleg joins us today to share his inspiring story of the odds that he had to overcome to have the life he has today. In particular, he's going to share his experience about growing up with an unstable home life where his basic needs weren't met, and how at the age of 9 he decided to enter an orphanage and the challenges he faced there. He'll talk about how folk singing brought him to the U.S., where he ultimately was adopted, and the 3 things his parents taught him that have allowed him to achieve his goals. And we'll talk about why challenges are necessary for growth. And Oleg will talk about why he doesn't blame his mom for what he experienced as a child, and how the work he's doing now started from a 2-page blog post, and really just lots of other great content in here. And I know you'll be able to relate whether you're someone who has been through the foster system or has been adopted or not. We're talking about overcoming whatever the odds may have been for you. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into this one, and I'll go bring Oleg on. Oleg, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today to share your story with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on your platform.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. You and I got connected through a mutual friend, and we recently also got to meet in person at one of your events, which was great. Mm-hmm. I love it whenever I have a chance to meet one of my guests in person. So, so I'm looking forward to having you share your story with us here today. Mm-hmm. You have an organization called Overcoming Odds, and you have your own story of overcoming the odds that I think the listeners will find really inspiring. So, Oleg, what I like to do here is start with your story of what you experienced growing up, and then we'll go from there. Does that sound good to you?
Absolutely. I love that segue into that part of my life because my story starts in a small town. I keep saying small, but it's actually, I think, over 1 million people. But the reason why,
small.
Exactly. The reason why I think I picture it small because when I had lived in that town, I was able to travel by foot from one end of town to the other. So I think when you have that picture in mind, you automatically think that it's a relatively small town because you could get from one end to the other in 20 or 30 minutes. Mm. But the town that I was born is called Chibarkul, which is in the lower part of Russia in the direction of Kazakhstan. And I had lived there for the first 12 years of my life. Just like you said previously, my life had a lot of obstacles and a lot of odds to overcome. And some of those started as early as 4 to 5 years old when my family's dynamic had changed drastically. And what I mean by that is my mother, who was on the path of becoming a nurse, had all of a sudden fallen off that path and turned to alcohol. And so she became an alcoholic from a very early age of mine, where I believe it is an age, it was a very critical point for me because I was looking for someone who could be a mentor, who can help relay certain information to me and help me understand what this world was all about. But all of a sudden there was a challenge, and that was my mother was no longer able to be in that particular role.
Mm-hmm. Was your dad around at all?
My dad was not around. My dad left at birth.
Okay.
And there are 2 stories that go with that. The first one is that he he had left when I was born to go live with his parents in Belarus. And the second story is that he had spent a majority of his life in prison. So I think in this particular case, it's a little bit harder to understand what the truth actually is.
You're not really sure.
Exactly. So it's one of those instances where I think I would have to go back there and figure out this information for myself by interviewing different people that might have had contact with myself or my family or even him. But so he ended up leaving at birth, and I ended up living this lifestyle where I kind of just went from one household to another. I lived between where my sister lived and my cousins, and sometimes I even had to spend some time in the street because the things within my mom's life were so there was just so much chaos because she rarely was in the position where she was sober enough. So she ended up being going from one boyfriend to another and to another. So my living condition with her was very much in jeopardy because I couldn't really understand where I would be sleeping that night. And one of the things that I've learned over time is, and I don't know, this experience may be different for you, but for me as a little kid, all I wanted was my family. I think at the end of the day, that's one of the things that we always want is we want to be loved. We want to understand that we belong somewhere, and we want to understand that there are people like you. And what I mean by that is people like you are people who feel so connected to you and oftentimes it's the people that are within your family that represent those figures.
I think that's what
So
everyone wants at that age, right? I mean, you just want that
exactly.
sense of belonging and that stability and just like a basic human need.
And be cared for, exactly. And so those were the things that I ended up missing at a very early age. And so people ask me nowadays, how are you able to make a lot of the decisions moving forward? One of those decisions was when I was 9 years old and I had relinquished my parents' rights to go into an orphanage.
And what I'm curious now, what was it that, made a 9-year-old kind of decide that this was, going to be the best thing for you to do or to even be aware that that was an option?
hmm I think what helped me realize that was I had somehow heard of the orphanage system from a couple of my friends that I used to have in the area. And I didn't really have an understanding of what that system was. I was just kind of told that it's almost like your second home. And so as a 9-year-old kid, especially someone who has been through so many different traumatic experiences up until 9, I had realized that in order for me to create a better future for myself, I need to somehow change the trajectory within my life. So to answer your question, I think it was just a compilation of all the experiences that I had prior to 9 that helped me develop the resilience and the courage to really take that next step forward. And so when I was 9 years old, I remember I was sitting on one end of the table with my sister behind me, and the person who was in charge of placements was sitting right in front of me, and she was telling me this whole image of what the orphanage was like, the fact that you'll have friends to play with, toys, food, shelter, basically everything that I needed to hear at that particular time.
All the things
And
that were missing.
exactly all the
Hmm
things that were missing. And so I think when you are told the things that you're missing, it becomes that much harder to reverse your decision. So I
hmm
came into that room, I was saying yes to myself. And then as soon as I heard all the things that were missing within my life, I was like, absolutely. There's no way I can go back now.
hmm
Um, Ultimately, I think just like anything else in life, I was put through a lot of different challenges within the orphanage. Um, some of them that I know that you and I are going to get into this through this conversation when it comes to talking about certain traumatic experiences. But one of the things that I learned from the very first day was that it was one of those settings where you don't speak unless spoken to, and you just don't speak about the things that happen in that household. And so for the 3 years that I was there from 9 until 12, I had gone through numerous traumatic experiences that have helped, and in a way helped me become who I am today. Because now when I look at challenges or obstacles, I view them as things that have to happen in order for me to grow and move forward.
Hmm. That must have been difficult for you. I mean, to go into that environment, kind of having certain expectations. I imagine that, you were
Mm-hmm.
going to be having these unfulfilled needs met finally. And
Mm-hmm.
then now, you're experiencing more trauma in a place that you
Yeah.
thought was going to be safe.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that was also interesting while living there was one of the ways that the orphanage was described. It was described as a place of safety. But to be completely honest with you, during my 3 years there, very rarely did I feel that I was safe. And especially the times that I did feel unsafe was when my sister and my other relatives would come visit me. Because the way that the orphanage was structured was there was a lobby that was on the first floor of a 3-family orphanage, and it was right across from the director's room. So when you think about it, when you have conversations within that lobby, everything that you say and everything that you do can be seen or heard by the director. So for me, at a very young age, I understood that I couldn't actually tell my sister the things that were happening. I couldn't tell her that I was getting beat for wetting my bed. And a lot of that was happening because I was going through so much trauma, so many transitions within my life. And so I couldn't really actually tell her the things that were happening. And I ended up telling her this whole story 6 years after I was adopted. So I was 18 years old. And she had told me, she said, why didn't you tell me? You could have just told me. I would have helped you get out of there and everything. And I said, how could I tell you that?
Hmm.
We sat in the same room, and I knew that the director might have been in her office. So even if I told you one thing, the next thing that I was picturing was that you would go to the director and tell her what I was telling you, and that would get me even more trouble.
Hmm.
So it was experiences like that that I had to live with and really understand that at that particular time, I didn't have a voice.
Yeah. And I can relate to that too. Being bullied in school, I I felt like I couldn't tell anyone what was going on, and
Hmm.
I thought if I told my mother, she was going to go in there and, make a big deal out of it, and then that was going to set me up to be a bigger target for the bullying. And
Yes.
so I felt like my only option was just to keep quiet and keep it to myself. And
Hmm.
that really, it takes away your voice, like you said, and it's does not set you up well for later in life.
Yeah, and that's the best thing I think we can do at times is at the end of the day, as long as you know that you have yourself to trust and believe in, that's really the best tool that I found for myself. Because throughout life, what I've learned is that there's so many people that have come into my life, and I'm talking about the good and the bad and everything in between, as far as the type of influences that I've had. And what I've learned is that at the end of the day, no matter who the person may be, all you can do is just trust yourself and trust your gut instinct and your reasoning and everything that makes up who you are. So for me to live that particular lifestyle when I wasn't telling other people, I did not think there was anything abnormal about it. I just knew that at the end of the day, if I can live with it, then that's what it's going to take.
Hmm. Yeah. So you said you were there until you were 12. What happened at that point?
I was So one of the things that I was fortunate to be introduced to while living at the orphanage was a folk singing program, which actually developed out of our classroom lessons. I think it was 9 years, 10 years old by the time we were required to take um, small kind of folk singing, dancing, playing the piano type lessons. It started off as just the teacher and you. And then from there, it became something much bigger. And what I mean by that, it actually grew into a program of 12 other kids who could sing, some could dance, And what I began to realize was that this might have been it. This might have been my opportunity to get out of this situation that I had created for myself ultimately. So as a 10-year-old kid, realizing that this is a shot to get out, what I mean by shot to get out was I did not understand that I could get to the United States. I just thought that this was a way to get additional exposure to my talent and actually have this develop into some sort of career or profession down the road. So we began performing within some of the cities around Russia, and we would compete against other schools and orphanages and other organizations, and would actually win prizes. I remember the very first time I was so nervous before I got on the stage because I was the only one performing. So, and I knew that that there was going to be first, second, and third place, and that the winner would receive some sort of prize, like a bicycle or a camera or um, candy or whatever it may be. So for me, that was really my first test of whether or not I can perform, not only for myself, but in front of other people. So I remember actually before I got on the stage, this was in a town called Chelyabinsk, which is about 45 minutes to an hour away from the town that I was originally from, Chubarkul. And I was standing there behind the curtain and just thinking to myself, can I really do this? And part of me was actually wanting to turn around and not go on stage at all. My stomach would, entirely flip. My hands were shaking. And then somehow within that moment, I just realized that this is what you have to do. So as a 10-year-old kid, I really describing how I was able to make those decisions. I think it's nearly impossible. What I learned is that I was able to make a lot of those decisions because I was a lot more mature for my age due to the experiences that I had. So ultimately, it was a folk singing that got us out of Russia and brought us to the United States. There was a group of 12 kids that were invited to perform at some of the local churches in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And when I came here, we first came here in 2004 for a 2-week visit to stay with what soon to be our parents, and didn't speak any English, didn't know anything about this part of the world besides just a handful of names. One of those names was Michael Jordan. So it's funny looking back at it now because that's a name I knew so well, but yet I didn't even know what a basketball looked like.
Mm-hmm.
So we came here, performed for 2 weeks, and then we returned back to Russia, and then that's when the adoption process had started. And ultimately, my family from Ann Arbor, Michigan, ended up adopting me. They also have a son of their own who is a little bit older than I am. But in 2005, everything came together, and I was able to leave that country and come here and start with square one. And that
Wow.
was really learning the English language.
What was that like for you? I mean, was that scary or was that exciting or a little bit of both?
I think it was definitely a combination of the two. It was exciting because it was full of opportunities. My mind just constantly kept racing, saying that there's so many things that are now possible. And a lot of them were just beyond my conception. I didn't even understand what was possible once I got here. The part that was a little bit nerve-wracking was that I was starting with almost nothing. I came here, I was put in the middle of 6th grade, and by that time, most of the kids, actually almost every single one of the kids, could speak English. They can perform well when it came to science or math or any other subject. And I was at a level where I was learning at second or third grader at best.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very challenging to be put in that experience and to persevere through a lot of the challenges. But it was one of those things that had to happen. And one of the things that I think oftentimes doesn't get spoken of many times is when you, at least in my case, when I came here and I had to learn English, it wasn't me just sitting in my room at my house. and picking up each letter of the alphabet, and A, apple, B, banana, C, candy. It was me actually immersing myself into this culture and going to classes with kids who were 4 or 5 years old. So as you can imagine, as a 12-year-old kid, when you're sitting in the class with those who are literally just starting to learn the language, it becomes a little bit embarrassing. There's a lot of shame that gets created.
Mm.
And so in addition to just learning the things that you had to learn, you also had to learn how to deal with a lot of those feelings
Sure.
and process them. And as you could imagine, when you are trying to find ways to cope with that, it affects your identity.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you begin to think, well, am I truly not capable as someone else may be who's my age? So you put yourself down to the kids that you're surrounding yourself with. You know, the whole concept behind you are the average of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. Well, I was sitting in the classroom with kids who were 5 years old, and I was 7 years older. So it was harder to conceptualize and really understand. I'm not at their level when it comes to certain things, but yet I'm in the same exact class. I'm learning the same exact stuff as them.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure, like, at that age, you're not able to understand that, you shouldn't compare yourself to them, like
Mm-hmm.
you're at
Absolutely.
the level that you're at and they were where they're at.
Yeah, I think that just happens over time when you really begin to understand that there's no reason to set certain expectations or live a life where you're comparing yourself to others, because that's where you fall into a trap of not living your own life.
Mm-hmm.
When you begin to think, I need to be like this person. Well, why do you have to be like this person? You may want to strive for certain qualities or certain goals that that person has accomplished, but you don't have to be exactly like that person. That person got to where they are through an entirely different journey, which 99% of the time, maybe even 100% of the time, you will not be able to replicate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think, that's what can happen at that age, especially in a school environment, whether it's a situation like yours or a situation like mine where you're being bullied, like you're comparing yourself to others.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just, that's hurting you.
Mm-hmm. And I know that one of the things that I had learned when I was at that school, the middle school is called the Ann Arbor Open, was at that school. And because I could barely speak any English, I actually ended up being on the other end of what you just described. Not someone who was necessarily bullied, but for a time of my life, especially in sixth grade, part of me, I was a bully. And it simply was because of the fact that I didn't really understand the language, or I
Mm.
didn't understand the culture. So it's very important the people that you surround yourself with, because when I was at that age, I remember one of my first friends, I still make a joke to him that he is not the best role model a foreigner could have. And he was still trying to figure out things for himself. So I think it's one of those instances where he was experimenting with, every type of behavior possible. So whether that's picking on certain kids, making fun of what they wear, or um, pimples, or like whatever it may be, he would find a way to pick at them and get under their skin. And so for me, because of the fact that he had accepted me as a friend from that point on, it was very important for me to find a friend within that time. Because by sixth grade, a lot of people have already friend groups that they feel comfortable within. So for me, understanding that he was a friend, or he was something that was willing to be there for me and help me get adjusted and learn, it was extremely critical. So I said yes, like, yes, I'll be your friend. But with that, I had picked up on a lot of the behaviors that he was going through. So it was later on in life, 2 or 3 years in, that's when I began to understand that a lot of the things that I was saying and doing were not myself, but rather they were what I was seeing from him. And because I didn't really understand the language that well at that particular time, I had no other option.
Mm-hmm.
but to behave that way. So looking back at it now and looking back at your experience as someone who was on the other end, it's, I feel deeply sorry for the people that I might have hurt during that time. But at the same time, in my case, there was no other way for me to learn or to even know the right versus the wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Um, so what was your experience like with your adoptive family? Was that a positive one for you?
Oh, absolutely. They truly have been everything that I could have imagined from a very early age. They've given me the support, they've given me the guidance throughout the years where in a way, they've made me who I am today. And the reason why I say that is because my parents, one of the things that done very successfully is that they've never pressured me into a decision. They've given me the options around the particular decision, but they never told me this is the way to do it and there's no other way. And so I think when you live in a household like that, where it's a lot of the dialogue you have is open-minded, it increases your chances for success that much more, because then you know that there are so many options to get to one particular point. And that's one of the things that I was able to share at the event that you were a part of in San Diego, was that even though it may seem challenging to get to a particular task, that doesn't mean you can't get there. All it means is there may be a different way or a different approach to get to the same end goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's what my parents ultimately taught me, is to never give up, to always believe in myself, to know that they're always there for me and they're always there to support me. And with those three things, I think I've been able to accomplish almost everything in life that I've wanted to and that I continuously set my mind to, because I know that at the end of the day, I can get through any challenge just by knowing those three. And so
Mm-hmm.
with that in mind, I firmly believe that there's no challenge that you cannot overcome in this life. So my parents have been very pivotal role models within my life. My dad taught me a lesson which I'll never forget, and that is, he said, never say you can't do something. My mom told me, don't ever sell yourself short. So between those two, I think I've been able to get through anything that the life has thrown at me in a way.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. Yeah. And having that mindset and that perspective, I mean, that's what's going to help you to continue to achieve those goals that you have and to
Hmm.
always be able, to push through whatever challenges might come your way, because of course, challenges will always come our way.
Oh yeah.
Um,
And I think the challenges and the obstacles are necessary. I think without the challenges and the obstacles, it becomes that much more difficult to grow,
mhm,
because you don't know what you're doing right. And you don't even know if the thing you're doing is right. So I think it's important to always be challenged. And one of the things that I've been able to learn over the past couple years is that there's really no such thing as failure. You don't fail. And the reason why you don't fail is because I firmly believe that failure should just be viewed as learning. You have to learn. You have to understand that the things you're doing are actually having an impact. When you're trying to impact people's lives, there's no one way of doing it. You may be able to engage with one person and they'll react in one way, and that engagement and interaction may be entirely different from another person. And just because, let's say, one of them had reacted to you and actually embraced everything you had said, and then the other one then just didn't hit as deep, that doesn't mean that you failed with the second one. That means that there's a different approach that needs to be taken. So I think that's really what I learned from my parents and the people that I'm choosing to surround myself with now, is that you have to be challenged in order to grow. And you have to be challenged in order to achieve great things in life. If you're not challenged, and if you're not challenging yourself, one of the things that I try and do is I always try and challenge myself, whether it comes financially or emotionally, physically. That is, you set certain, it's not necessarily goals, but it's different challenges. So for example, let's say when it comes to finances, You say, okay, this is my bank account right now. This is how much I currently have in it. This is how much I can live. These are the things I can do. And then you just exceed that. Like, especially when it comes to debt. I firmly believe that it's okay to be in debt. It's not advised, maybe, because some people don't get out of it. But for others who want to use that as a thing to constantly keep going and keep growing, then it's perfect. And debt, there's so many different types of it. It's not only when it comes to money.
Mm.
It's just owing someone something,
Mm-hmm.
or owing yourself something. When you put a goal in front of yourself that you haven't achieved yet, in a way you are in debt to that particular goal. So I think it's just setting things like that and understanding that you will be challenged, and challenges are necessary before you get to a particular goal in life. And then from there, you just embrace it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Because I think without those challenges, we're just going to be complacent
Mm-hmm.
and we're not going to achieve what we want to achieve. There's
Mm-hmm.
not going to be anything there that's kind of pushing us. It's almost like you need that discomfort to push you along, to
Yeah.
get to where you want to be.
And
Um,
to let other people challenge you as well, which I think it's easier it's easier said than done, because you, just like anything else, especially with free advice, I believe that it has to be taken with a grain of salt. Um, and even with paid advice, because at the end of the day, that person that's giving you those particular suggestions or recommendations, whatever it may be, it's based on their way of living. So really understanding how to handle constructive criticism is entirely a different skill of its own. But it's one of those that I firmly believe is necessary, because it's one thing to challenge yourself, but you're only challenging yourself based off of what you know right now.
mhm,
So it's harder for you to understand and challenge yourself based off of the future or what you don't know. How many times do you ask yourself, what is it that I don't know? That's probably one of the hardest questions to answer, at least for me, is what do I not know?
we don't know
And
what we don't know,
exactly.
right?
So like, where do you even start there? So if you allow other people to answer that question for you, then that's how you're going to grow even more, because they're helping you go into the unknown.
Mhm. And yeah, that's not easy. That's not always comfortable. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but at the end of the day, if you want to grow, if you want to, you know, get further along, and have these goals that you want to achieve, it's really, necessary, to be kind of challenged in that way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Every single day, I think that's one of the things that I always fall back on, is challenging myself, just even with one simple task on a daily basis of something that is uncomfortable. So in a way, you're always learning how to be comfortable in being uncomfortable. And I think that's important when you just mentioned the fact that a lot of the growth comes from the times when you don't feel comfortable. I 100% agree with that, because you're going into the unknown, and you're always, I think, like for me, one of the things is I'm always seeking answers to different questions. And as part of that process, it's stepping outside of your comfort zone and going in an entirely different field and understanding how to play within the rules of that game.
Hmm. And that's scary. And I think, what you said there is so key, that it's about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, just
Mm-hmm.
coming to accept that, things are going to be uncomfortable, and you just have to learn, ways to get comfortable with that being the case.
Oh,
And I
yeah,
think, that
absolutely.
makes it a little easier.
Absolutely. I think even with, I remember the first day when I had started our podcast, and it has, I mean, it has gone through so many different phases. You might be able to recall the same thing, but I still remember recording episode 1, and I was sitting in the same room with one of my friends who's a pretty well known name here in Austin, Texas. And all of a sudden, part of me just froze because all of a sudden I was doing something new. And I was having a camera in front of me, a microphone, and so everything seemed more real than it really was. And throughout that time, as I recorded one after another, I just learned that you just have to do this stuff. Every new task, when you start it off, yes, it does become overwhelming. You do get nervous, but that's because you've never done it before. So you have no way understanding what to expect or how it's going to feel or what you're going to think. So when you go into the unknown or any new task, I think it's important to understand and embrace it for what it is. And that is, it's a new task. You are going to learn from it if you choose to, and you just got to go with it.
Mm-hmm. And then over time, it's not so scary anymore.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
After doing a podcast for 4 years, it's not so scary to me anymore.
Yeah. And you develop so much as a person as well. I've learned for myself that you become a lot more aware, or I did, and I've become a lot more aware when it comes to my language. I used to use a lot of unnecessary fillers or and things like that in between. But really what I've learned is that the more you get into these settings, when you're having open conversations with other people, you have to become aware of the things you say and when you say them. So as I started doing this, I noticed that my speech improved, I mean, tremendously.
Yeah. And you're very good at English now, by the way.
Well, once again, it took a lot of took a lot of practice to get to this point. Um,
Yeah, I'm
which
sure
I,
it did. But what I get from you and from hearing, about your journey is that you're just very determined and very driven, and
Mhm.
that's led you to where you are now and how you're doing today.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on with that. And at the end of the day, I think you can never give up. You
Mm-hmm.
have to keep going. So I think that's the fundamental thing behind drive and determination and everything is that perseverance. To know that no matter what it is that you have in front of you, you're not going to give up and you will find a way. I mean, there's always a way. In everything that you do in life, there's always a way to get out. In my case, it started off rough. I had a family, then all of a sudden I really didn't have a family to rely on. And so as a young kid, I had to figure out ways. And from that very early age, I understood that, yes, there is a way to get out of the situation that my mom was in. There's a way to get out of the household that she was living in at times where all I could see were empty shot glasses on the table and there was no food to eat. And so all I would do is cry. And then after a while, I just said to myself, okay, I can either sit here or cry, or I can go to the grocery store around the corner and steal a loaf of bread and solve that problem. So I'm looking back at all this now with a completely different mindset and understanding, but that's really how it was back in the day. Is that's how I solved a lot of the problems and came to a lot of the decisions. And so I think with that in mind is you can persevere through anything that you set your mind to. And with that, if you continue to believe in yourself, that you're gonna make it to whatever it is that you're trying to create out of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you feel like the way that you are now is just as a result of the upbringing that you had and everything that you had to go through at that age?
Oh, absolutely. I think everything goes back to those days because there were so many fundamental lessons that I was taught, whether it was intentional or not, that's a different story. But a lot of the things that I had learned at that particular time have become just core principles within my life right now because there's so many times where I had to understand what life even was or what it was like to have a mom or where do you find food tonight or shelter or things like that. And so I think when you're put in those instances of survival and then you move forward in life and where I am right now, those skills that you learn during that time become your foundation. that's why I believe when there are obstacles or where there are challenges along the way, I always tell myself I've been through this and here are the skills that I learned through it. And so I always fall back on those skills. And I help myself understand that I've been in situations that are worse than this. And so knowing that any challenge or a lot of the mindset that I have, it's I understand that I already possess the skills to get out of any sort of situation, which I think at the end of the day, most people have, and they just haven't been able to tap into those skills and unique abilities. And so it's almost a responsibility of those who have overcome certain things or who understand who they are and who understand how they got to a particular point. I think it's their responsibility to give back, to take a step back and say, okay, this person is in need of this. Can I help them tap into whatever it is they possess already to help them overcome a particular challenge or obstacle within their life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, whenever, we've gone through challenges in life, we can always use that, whenever we're going through a current challenge and remind ourselves that we've already, you know, made it through that. So we can make it through whatever we're going through now,
Uh-huh.
and I think, yeah, like some people maybe, they haven't tapped into their ability to do that yet, and they don't look at it that way. But I think that we've all been through things that we can use, to help us get through anything that we might be going through now.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I know that you talked about, how your experience growing up affected you then. Did you find that you were being affected by it at all as you were becoming an adult?
I think I was. I think I have always thought back of the things that have happened to me. And so, especially when it comes to trauma, I think one of the biggest questions that I try and answer for myself is how do I see my birth mother again? So, my birth mom had died in an apartment fire the year after I was adopted.
Oh wow.
And one of the things that I have of her, which is kind of interesting how and why it is the way it is, but I only have one picture of her. And yet I have hundreds and hundreds of other pictures of living at the orphanage, being with my sister, childhood, everything. But I only have one picture of her. And it's the second to last week that she came into the orphanage to visit me and really make sure that I was making the right decisions and wanting to go halfway across the world to live with a new family. So to answer your question, absolutely. I deal with it on a daily basis. And what I'm learning is that there are some things that are within your control, and then there are some things that are out of your control. And this is one of those instances where it's out of my control. I mean, there's absolutely nothing that I can do right now to bring her back to life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a difficult one to live with. And I live with it in a way where I've never blamed her for any of the decisions that she made because I understand that we're humans and sometimes we make, and it's not even necessarily we make mistakes, but we make decisions based off of the information that we have available to us at that given time. So when you really think about just the whole label of mistakes, I mean, you wouldn't make mistakes if you had all the information in front of you at all times.
Mm-hmm.
So in her case, I don't think she ever made any mistakes when it came to alcohol, when it came to saying yes to me going to the orphanage and then finally giving me up and everything. She made those decisions based off of what she knew. So I can never blame her for any of the things that happened. But I will say this, that it's one of those things that I still try and cope with. And that is knowing that I will never get a chance to see her again.
Mm.
So it's a difficult thing to process and tell another person of what that feels because it's one of those instances where if you happen to you, then you know what it is. But if
Mm-hmm.
it hasn't, it's that much harder to communicate the full picture of what it may feel and the type of impact she might have had on you, because you can do so much through the spoken word. You can tell how the person has impacted your life, the type of skills they taught you and lessons and everything, but it's that much harder to communicate the emotional thing that she taught me. And so that's a challenge that I'm trying to not even overcome, but more so just understand that it's there, because I think that's the first step of overcoming the challenges. Is you got to recognize that there is a challenge to overcome to begin with. And so that's the phase that I'm at right now, is recognizing that that's an area that is going to require a lot of healing and different forms of healing. Writing, speaking, listening to others. And so through it, I think I'll be able to find a space within my life where I feel comfortable with that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's key that you were saying that, to be aware that there's a challenge there.
Oh, yeah.
And then from there, then we can do the work that we need to do to get through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Otherwise, I think we just end up stuck, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, well, how are you doing overall today, Oleg?
I'm doing phenomenal. I'm doing phenomenal. I think every single day you can't treat every single day as if it were yesterday, or that's really the best way to look at it. So I look at every single day as a new opportunity to just live your life, to improve on the things that you want to improve on. And with that in mind, I think it just allows me to be that much more grateful for conversations like these that really allow me to express who I am and what I'm trying to accomplish and what I'm trying to do. I'm a firm believer that, everyone has a story in this world, and everyone's story is unique. And it's important for people to create spaces like these where other people's stories can be heard. So much of today's world, not so much, but a good portion of it, is focused on the seven-figure earners or people who are in the millions when it comes to these type of platforms. But really, at the end of the day, I think all we're trying to do is just hear another person's experience and then see yourself within that person. Like, oh, I've been there, or oh, I'm here. This is what I'm trying to do. This is what I'm trying to overcome.
Mm.
And so
It's all about connection, right?
it is. It's all about connection. It's all about learning about other people and allowing some of those perspectives to come into your life and hopefully change you for better or worse. Like, no one gets to determine that but yourself. So you're absolutely right. I think majority of life, it's all about connecting and wanting to learn and wanting to improve and wanting to help. But even with help and everything else, you really can't do any of those things unless you connect. Whether it's connect to yourself, connect to other people. When you offer help, you have to be able to connect with that person. And beyond your profession or what it is that you do, you really have to connect to them at heart, because that's what's going to tell you what they're struggling with and an area that they need help with and an area that they're willing to accept you into. Because some people, myself included, we have different challenges and struggles that we're trying to get help with, but we only allow certain perspectives for those challenges. For example, when it comes to coping with the loss of my mom, you may not be able to help me in that particular case because you might not have experienced what it is that I'm trying to answer for myself,
Mm-hmm.
and vice versa. So it's really just being open to other people and their connections and the value that every person can provide. I think that's what life is about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, Oleg, share with us what it is that you do today.
So what I started about a little bit over a year ago is an organization in Austin, Texas called Overcoming Odds that started as a place for those who have been adopted or in foster care to share their stories and experiences of going through that journey. Recently, we have developed this into kind of the third stage of this organization, and that is we began to host in-person conferences that are inspired by themes and experiences that are within the adoption and foster care journey. So you were at one of them in San Diego called Embrace Who You Are, which which was really all about embracing your identity and I think developing authenticity within your own story and knowing that it's okay to be where you are today because there's so many other people that are going along similar journeys that you are. So moving forward, our goal is to host these events in different parts of the country. One of them that we have coming up in LA on February 23rd called Survive to Thrive. And it is all about showing different ways that people have been able to survive in this lifetime and hopefully allowing others to tap into their own skills and have them better understand that, oh, I have this. Oh, I've been there. Oh, this is how I've done that. So once they tap into that, that's what it's all about when it comes to the core message of this is allowing people to embrace their own unique abilities. So it's very interesting how it all started because the whole thing has started from a 2-page blog post of
Oh,
me
really?
sharing it was just me sharing my story in a chronological order.
Mm-hmm.
And since it grew into this, I had a vision that it might be able to grow into this. Obviously, one of the things that I didn't understand was how it would grow. I don't think you ever know that until it actually happens. You may have a vision of the final result, but it's that much harder to really understand how you're going to get there. Because I don't think we ever know how it's going to happen. Because there's so many different possibilities of
Mm-hmm.
how one result can happen. So that's what we're working on right now is we are traveling from one city to another and we're hosting these conferences. And the point of the conference is you don't have to be adopted or you don't have to be in foster care to really understand and relate to the message that's being communicated through it. Because at the end of the day, I think if you are seeking to connect with other people, if you are seeking to develop a community, and if you are seeking for a place where you can belong, then this is what it's all about. Because you can connect with any person regardless of their background. When you think about people with different professions, just because you're an accountant and I'm not in accounting or have no knowledge of that field, that does not mean I can't connect with you because there's so many other things that we can connect over. And so these events are not any different. These events are simply places where you can connect with other people and experience their journeys and then have them experience the journey that you're going through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I felt like, the event that I went to in San Diego was, very relevant for me, even though I'm not, adopted or have gone through a foster care system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just being able to connect with others who have, their own experiences of trauma growing up and, getting to hear the speakers and just, being inspired by their stories. So I think it's absolutely relevant for anyone, who has
Yeah.
gone through something, and they just want to be able to connect with others who have as well and to be inspired by them.
Yeah. And as long as you can relate, and it's interesting that you said this because what I sensed was that you were able to relate to this event and to the speakers and people in the room based on certain hardships that you've overcome in your life.
Right.
I think that's what it's really all about is when I can relate to you outside of the labels that have been created for us in most cases. And that is that if I can just say, oh, you've been through this, I've been through this, and then we can find common ground, then that's all it's about. It's not necessarily what you do for a living, how much you make, where do you live, your skin color, your age, or anything like that. It's all about the experiences that you've been through and the experiences that I've been through. and finding ways to relate.
Yeah, I think it's great. And I know you have plans to do more events next year and
Uh-huh.
in different parts of the country as well, right?
Yep. Yep.
So hopefully, you'll be able to reach a lot of people and they'll get to attend and just have this great experience of connecting with others.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the goal behind all of it.
Yeah. So, Oleg, I want to ask you the final question that I have for you today. And that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
That's a phenomenal question. The one piece of advice that I would give to myself, if looking back at everything, is find a mentor. Find the person that you can look up to. Find the person that you can see yourself in, and find a person that believes in you. I think it's extremely critical, and it was critical in my life when I had finally found that person. That person for me were my parents. They became the role models that I needed. So finding a mentor, it's so much more than just helping you professionally. A good mentor is going to help you live life. Profession and the business and everything that you create is just one element of your life. When I have conversations with some of my closest mentors right now, yes, we may have an agenda, and yes, we may have a timeline for the call and everything. And yes, half of the call, or 75%, we will talk about the things in the agenda. But the remainder of the time is all about life. How are you doing? Who are you dating? How are they making you feel? What are you doing there? What are you doing here? So it's all about just figuring out things about life and connecting on that level. So looking back at everything, I wouldn't change anything that has happened to me because all those things made me who I am today. But looking back at it all and based on the impact that other people have had in my life, I would highly recommend that finding a mentor and really focusing on the connection that you would have with that person beyond business, beyond helping you develop a professional career, beyond a specific task. It's the best way to put it, but really getting a well-rounded perspective on the whole thing and the whole experience that you would have with that person.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great advice. Absolutely. So, Oleg, before I let you go, what is the best way that people can connect with you or find out more about what you're up to and the events?
Mm-hmm. The best way to connect with us is either follow us through social media. The username is Overcoming Odds, or people can go on our website and check out all the information about upcoming events, including the one in LA on February 23rd called Survive to Thrive. The website is overcomingodds.today. And so through any of those channels, people want to connect with us or just ask questions, anything like that, we're always open. I can be found through all of those as well. And so if it's a direct question to me about the experience or the things they might have heard on the show or the podcast, whatever it may be, I'm more than happy to answer it and help anyone that's seeking help.
Awesome. That sounds great. And I'll have that linked up on your show notes page.
Awesome.
So thank you for that. And yeah, I just
Mm-hmm.
want to thank you for coming on here today and sharing your journey with us. And, I think inspiring us with what you've gone through and, how you've been able to get to where you are now and how, it's just all about never giving up, and
Mm-hmm.
always finding ways to get to where you want to be. So I think it's a great message and thank you for sharing it with us.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And thank you for creating this space where other people can talk about their experiences and know that they are worth it and their experience does matter, because at the end of the day, there aren't many people that do things like this. Because, I mean, as you could tell, it does take a lot of courage and practice that you have to get through, not only for yourself, but also for the other people. You want other people to understand that you're not simply just asking questions for the sake of asking questions, because I'm sure that some of these questions and topics are also helping develop you. So I admire people that are striving for more in life. And so you're one of the people that's creating this platform to help others, help yourself, and help anyone else that's willing to accept the fact that there is always more, that there are other ways to improve, that there's always more to learn. And so I really appreciate the work that you've done.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I hope that you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 144. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Oleg L to find the links mentioned during this episode or to leave a comment. So I hope you enjoy this episode today and getting to hear about Oleg's journey. I really love the determination and perseverance that he possesses and the work that he's doing today. And if Oleg's journey has resonated with you, then I definitely invite you to check out his website and the events that he's hosting to see if there are any in your area that you might be able to attend. And come back in 2 weeks for the next episode. I believe that will be with an all-new guest as well. And also head over to the website to grab your free copy of the Top 10 Strategies Guide for Survivors. In it, you'll find the top 10 most common strategies my podcast guests have used for overcoming the effects of past trauma. It's a great place to get started if you're looking for some strategies that can help you in your healing, as they have helped my guests. And you can find that at thegrassgetsgreener.com/guide, or also on the show notes page. So be sure to grab that if you haven't yet. And lastly, don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And, as always, have hope.